All right, guys, we're going to take a look at our next topic, which is going to be covering what we call percent yield. So what is percent yield? Well, percent yield is a value that tells us how much of a certain product was produced or yielded in this case within a chemical reaction. So sometimes we have a couple of reactants, 2 or 3 reactants combining together. We want to know how much product was actually formed when that reaction took place. So your idea is that you typically want to get 100%. Okay? If you can get 100% product, that means that you had a perfect reaction. You cannot form anything greater than 100. So it's always going to be either 100% or less. And the idea is that you want to get closest to 100 as possible. So the closest to 100 you get, the more successful your reaction actually was. So the percent yield formula is shown up here at the top. It's also on your formula charts and your star charts. Actual yield is often abbreviated as AY, and theoretical yield is often abbreviated TY. So sometimes you might see this written as percent yield equals AY, which is actual yield, divided by TY, which is theoretical yield, and then all of that quantity multiplied by 100. Because we're dealing with a percent, we're always multiplying by 100 to convert to a percent. Okay, so what is the actual yield? The actual yield is the measured amount. It's what you actually got in a some sort of a chemical reaction or a chemical experiment. This is what you determine in your experiment. It's also referred to as experimental yield. Theoretical yield is what you should have gotten. It's what your maximum amount of product should have been had you done your experiment perfectly. So let's take a look at an example. I've got a box of cake mix to make cupcakes. The box says I should yield 24 cupcakes with this mix. So when I say yield, it means I should produce. Remember that word yield means produce or forms. So the box tells me I shouldn't be able to make 24 cupcakes. However, when I fill up my pan, I only have enough batter for 23 cupcakes. Okay, so first of all, determine what is your actual yield and what is your theoretical yield. Well, how many cupcakes did you actually form? I formed 23. The box says that I should have formed or produced 24, so that's my theoretical yield. So actual yield, theoretical yield. So now I plug it into my equation and figure out the percent yield. So percent yield, like written up above, is the actual yield divided by the theoretical yield, and lastly converted to a percent. So the actual yield was 23, the theoretical yield was 24, and then multiplied by 100. So 23 divided by 24 times 100 should get you close to 100%. You should get 95.83% yield out of that box of cupcakes, which is pretty close to 100. And I know that's going to be a high number because 23 is only 1 away from 24. Now, had this number been 12, then the percent yield would have been 50, because it's only half of what I should have gotten. Okay, but 23 is really close to 24. You remember, you want to get 100% or something very close to 100%. 95.83 is pretty close. All right, moving on. Let's look at a second example here. All right, my second example It says your lab experiment, your chemical your chemical reaction produces 52.5 grams of carbon dioxide gas. The reaction should have yielded 53.0 grams. Calculate the percent yield. All right, so find the actual yield. Let's see here. Actual yield, we're going to say it's AY. It's what you actually got in the experiment. And it says the reaction produces 52.5 grams of carbon dioxide. So that's what I actually got in my experiment. Okay, what should I have gotten? Well, it says the reaction should have yielded 53 grams. Okay, so I can already see that 52.5 is very, very close to 53. So that means my percent yield should be, it's not going to be 100. It would be 100 if this was 53 and this was 53. But because it's very close, this number should be in the high 90s. So let's figure that out. So our equation says percent yield equals the actual yield divided by the theoretical yield multiplied by 100. Well, the actual yield is 52.5. The theoretical yield is 53.0. Multiplied by 100, I should get 99.06%. Like I said, it's very close to 100. It's not quite 100, but it is going to be a high number, which is what you want. You want the higher the number you have, the better off you are. Okay, let's look at our last example here. It says that a chemist conducts a reaction and measures 13 grams of oxygen gas. So it's telling you that he did the reaction and he measured 13 grams of oxygen gas. In theory, his theoretical yield, what he should have measured, was 15.7 grams of oxygen gas. So in the experiment, it's what you actually determine. So experimental yield is the same thing as the actual yield. And he actually measured 13.3 grams of oxygen gas. What he should have measured is theoretical yield. In theory, if the experiment was perfect, he should have measured 15.7 grams of oxygen gas. So with that information, I want to figure out the percent yield. So percent yield is equal to the actual yield divided by the theoretical yield times 100. So the actual yield was 13.3. The theoretical yield is 15.7. Multiply that by 100, and you should get an answer not quite as high as what we've previously calculated, but it's still a high number. Should have gotten 84.71 or something along those lines. 84.71%. Now, again, this number is not as high. I would say if you calculate a percent yield that is within the 90s, that's pretty good. Anything less than 90, it seems like there might have been a lot of error or a lot of waste taking place in that reaction. So the closer to 100 you are in an experiment, the higher your percent yield, the better off or the most successful your experiment was.